Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the fourth installment of LHH's Women in Leadership Conversation Series for 2023. As a quick reminder, all lines are muted and you can place any questions you have in the Q&A function. I'll now hand you over to the host for today's conversation, Margot Hoyt, who is head of the North American Leadership Development Business. Margot, over to you.
Thank you so much, Kate, and welcome everybody. It's great to see such a good sized crowd here today. We're really excited about the fourth in our 2023 installment of this Women in Leadership Conversation Series and to have Catina Wilson with us here. We're going to start with a little bit of housekeeping and some general information, then I'll introduce you to Catina and we'll get right into the conversation. First of all, for those of you who know LHH, you might know us through our recruitment solutions practice, where we help bring professional resources into organizations. You might know us through our career transition and mobility, which also helps organizations with talent transitioning outside of the organization, but also within the organization from a mobility perspective. And then finally, you might know us through the part of the business that Kate mentioned. I lead our leadership development business, and that's where we take great pride in building capability and capacity in leaders to execute on strategy. So thank you very much for joining us. However you know LHH, we're really pleased to have you with us. And we're really excited to have Catina Wilson with us today. A couple of brief introductory comments about Catina. She's a senior global operations executive with more than 25 years of experience across a few different and diverse industries: fintech, financial services, automotive, and software. She currently serves as a global head of prepaid card operations and strategic partnerships for Fiserv, a $15 billion Fortune 500 financial technology leader. Formerly, Catina held progressive leadership roles with Cox Automotive and SunTrust Bank, and she sits on the board of directors for the Technology Association of Georgia and has an MBA from Georgia Institute of Technology. We're so pleased you're with us, Catina. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Happy to be here.
The way we're going to spend about the next hour of our time together is that Catina and I are going to have a conversation. We'll talk through some information about her background, some of her insights, some of her career moves, if you will, and then we'll open it up to questions and answers that you provide, those of you who are watching live today. So please find the Q&A spot. As we go through the conversation, feel free to pop those questions in. I'll try to remember to give you a one question warning as well so that you can start to put those in and we can get through as many as possible by the top of the hour. So without further ado, Catina, let's get started.
Let's get started.
All right. I like to start with a really easy, sort of broad question. Tell us a little bit about your career. You know, you've made some really interesting moves, different industries, different types of roles. Walk us through some of those and the highlights of how you made those decisions and who was important potentially in helping you through those.
Yeah, very good question. I have, to your point, I've had a variety of different, I guess, careers over the course of my journey. I actually started out as a program developer, believe it or not. So coming right out of college, first job, for a consulting company, I was a program developer. And I think everybody knows like how technology is constantly evolving, constantly changing. The company at the time that I worked for put a number of us through what they called kind of this programming boot camp. We were learning whatever the latest and greatest programming language was at that time. And at the end of that boot camp, it was about 8 weeks long. At the end of that boot camp, we had to present to our VPs of our business unit. And I came out of there no longer a developer, not because I wasn't a good developer, but the VP pulled me aside and said, "Hey, you don't belong behind a computer. You need to be in front of clients, right? You understand technology. You have a good way of being able to talk to the business, the good way of being able to talk to clients." And so my career immediately it shifted. And and I bring that particular example up because I think it just says a lot about being flexible and that willingness to pivot sometimes, because you may go into your career thinking, this one thing is something that I'm going to do for the rest of my life, but things come up and things change, right? And so, so from there, I moved into more of a client facing role. I ended up leaving that company to go work for a startup for a while. And when you work for a startup, you wear a lot of hats, right? So, I was a sales engineer, a pre-sales engineer, where I was, doing demos, in support of the sales cycle in front of clients. And then because we were a small company and we had this really large opportunity with Walt Disney, I was asked to go on site and to lead a proof of concept. And the proof of concept went so well, not only did we win the opportunity, but Disney wrote me in their contract and said she needs to lead the implementation. And so from there, I moved more into a project management function. And I'll be honest, I had no idea what project management was. So I was going out and I was buying all these books on how to lead a project and that sort of a thing. And so that took me down, for a good number of years, kind of this project and program management path, where I've led, some really large implementations. The largest one that I can think of, spanned like 9 different countries, and I worked overseas for a period of time. And then, I led, one that was more local, where there was a technology component and a business component, as well as a construction component. And so there were times I'm going to the construction site with hard hat and heels. Don't do that. You're not supposed to wear heels. I didn't know that, but I'm going to construction sites and things like that. And so, so I learned a lot in that journey, but then I got to a point where in my career where I said, I'm kind of getting bored, for lack of a better word, of project and program management. I can kind of do this stuff with my eyes closed. So I want to do something different. And so at that point in time, I decided to go back and get my MBA, because I felt like I had kind of the technology piece down. But where I found myself, at least, my thought process was at that time, was that I was lacking more of an understanding of like how business like truly works, the financials and the economics and that sort of a thing. And so I went back and I got my executive MBA from Georgia Tech. And then from there, I started to shift more, onto the business side of things. So I still leverage, a lot of those skills, because I think having a project and program management background is an excellent skill set to have. Having a technology background is an excellent skill set to have, because it helps you understand, how technology really like enables business, right? Right. But I felt like, for me, wanting to do something different, going back and getting my education to focus more on the business side of things really helped me also pivot. And so, from there, I've led strategy and operations. I've led, mergers and acquisitions, integrations, transformations. And now I'm currently running, one of our smaller business units, where, leading, our gift card business, which is, Fiserv. If you know anything about Fiserv, we do a lot for merchants in terms of, giving them the ability, leveraging technology, but giving them the ability to accept any and all forms of payments, and gift cards is a form of payment. And so, I was asked to come in and turn around this business and help grow this business. And I'm really proud to say that I've done that. So as you can see from my journey, it wasn't very linear. There were lots of changes, lots of pivots, lots of decision points along the way. And I think for me, when you ask the question, like, how and why I made some of these moves, I think knowing myself, but also at the same time being flexible to say, I'm open to trying to do new things, and I'm ready to try and do new things. So I think that, plays a lot into kind of my career journey.
An amazing journey and a fearless journey, right? It seems like you were jumping from one big opportunity to another big opportunity. I have a question for you. I wonder if that VP who tapped you on the shoulder way back knows how far you've come and how right he was about getting you out from behind the computer and in front of people at that very beginning.
Yeah, I love the word that you use, fearless. I would not say that I am fearless. If anything, I'm always fearful, right? Like you feel that fear, you feel those butterflies in your stomach. And I've been lucky along the way. I've had some really great mentors. And one particular mentor used to say to me, Catina, when you feel that fear, run to it. That's where your growth is, right? And so I always have to remind myself, because I tell the story and it sounds like, oh, you're like ready, I'm ready to just jump into it. But no, there's a lot of fear and apprehension, right? That comes up, when I'm making these decisions. And but her voice is always in my head of, okay, you feel that, now run towards that, because that's where your growth is. That's where the goodness is for you. And I got to be honest, I mean, whenever I think of her and I think of that statement and then I do run to it, it definitely typically falls in my favor, because I do grow, as a person, as a professional, that sort of a thing. So definitely when you feel that, run towards it, because that's where your growth is. And you have to be comfortable being uncomfortable too, right? That's the other favorite statement that, I use that even with my team. Get comfortable being uncomfortable.
That's a tough one. And it's not, sometimes we like to seek the places where we feel we can do it again, right? Like you said, we get comfortable in that place.
Yeah.
I'm really curious. You've talked about development in a couple of ways. First, you talked about when you were diving into project management, gathering books and learning that way. You went back to school. You've clearly developed through different roles. Just talk a bit about what does develop mean for you, and what have been the most impactful developmental experiences, perhaps?
Yeah, no, but really good question. I think, anybody that cares about kind of their career, and really wants to grow, I think there has to be this development component to it. And a lot of it will be on your own. Some of it can be through your company, whether it's going back and getting a formal education or, a certificate, but you have to want to grow, right? And that is something that is very important to me. And so, my company will pay for, educations, my company will pay for, various certifications, but I too also set aside my own budget for things. I read a lot, right? So I read a lot, whether it's on leadership, team development. I read a lot of magazines. I listen to podcasts, right, on, many of these same topics. I want to know what's going on in the industry, because, in this broader economic world of ours, Fiserv, while we're a big player, depending upon like what's happening in the world, it could have impact on my business. And so I'm constantly doing things to improve myself, whether it's, personally or professionally. But my career is very important to me. And so as a result of that, I know that development doesn't end with getting that 4-year degree or even, a graduate degree. That development doesn't end. And so every year I'm constantly doing things, again, whether it's reading a book, whether it's taking a certification class. And so as an example, when I stepped into this role, one of the things that I knew that I was going to have to do was fix some of our strategic partnerships. And the way that we were going about it didn't sit right with me. So what did I do? I went and researched, strategic partnership programs. And I found one that was a pretty good one in Switzerland. And, for 8 weeks, I'm on their hours taking class, because that was important for me to make sure that I get, these partnerships right. Right. So I think it depends on kind of like where you are in your journey. I do also spend a lot of time trying to grow, myself as a leader. It's important to me, especially when I've got people who report into me, who look up to me. It's important for me to be a good leader for them. And so, what does that mean? And leadership evolves over time, but what does that mean? And so, I'm constantly reading, lots and lots of books on just improving myself as a leader, as a coach, as a mentor, and that sort of a thing. So I think development means a lot of things for different people, but for me, it is an important component of like who I am as a person, because I need to grow. And in order to grow, I have to develop myself.
That's amazing. And that shows real commitment. You don't necessarily see that in all of your neighbors and colleagues at the office, right? That's terrific.
Yeah.
When I think about your career, the kinds of changes that you've made, it's spanned now over about 25 years. How do you think career development is changing, right? We've gone through a pandemic. We have a different way of working now. What's different about how you're managing your career today, for instance, than it might have been 5 years ago?
I don't know that I've managed my career differently from 5 years ago, but definitely from 10, maybe even 15 years ago, because I think before there was a clear kind of path, right? When you come out into the workforce, it was a clear path on, if you do these 5 things, you're ready for the next level. And then if you do these 10 things, then you're ready for the next level. And the world doesn't work that way for most organizations anymore, right? Part of how you manage your career is, is you're navigating a lot of that yourself, right? And so you have to figure out like how to build those relationships, how to figure out like, where the next opportunities are, who can you tap into your network to figure out like where those next opportunities are, where there are even opportunities are, who knows about, and then that's one of the things that I'm still constantly working on. As women, we work hard and we do a good job, but who knows that you're working hard? Who knows that you're doing a good job, right? Beyond kind of your day-to-day manager, right? Because a lot of times when these decisions on who's going to go into kind of this next expanded role or opportunity, those decisions are made even before the job is even posted, right? Right. And so for me, I've been fortunate because I've learned along the way to tap into my network, to build those relationships, to share kind of what I've accomplished, so that when these opportunities, including the role that I'm sitting in today, someone's tapping me on the shoulder to say, hey, I think you might be good for this thing. Would you be interested? Right. I wasn't even looking for a role, but I wanted to meet with my former president. I wanted to meet with her. We hadn't chatted in a few months, met her for coffee. And I wanted to just talk a little bit about my career, right? Said that, hey, these are the things that I'm working on. Do you agree? This is how I grow. And then by the end of that conversation, it was, hey, I've got this business that's struggling. I think you'd be really good at it. Would you consider it? Right. And then from there, there were a series of conversations with some folks on our team, and and here I am today. So I think it's about remembering that your career growth isn't very linear anymore. It's very relationship oriented. It's very performance oriented. But beyond your day-to-day boss, who else knows like what you're doing, what you've accomplished, and how do you get that message out?
It's something that I know a lot of women struggle with in terms of how do they humble brag or whatever they want to call it, in terms of just being really clear about their accomplishments and putting out there what it is they're looking for, that they do take their career very seriously.
Yeah.
Is this something that came naturally to you, or is it something that you've had to intentionally work on?
I'm still working on it, right? I don't know that I've necessarily mastered it, but I'll say this, when people ask me the question, well, what do you want to do next? I'll be honest, it is something that I struggle with, right? Because it's not necessarily a job or a title. I know the things that I like. I know the things that I'm good at. I know the things that I want to try, but it's not necessarily a role, right, that sits in the company. And so I remember having this conversation with a leader at a different company, maybe 6-7 years ago. And, he talked a little about his career, and it spanned from operations to sales to product management. It was a very varied career. But one of the things that he said, he goes, I've gotten really good at talking in terms of business, but I've gotten really good at just saying, I'm good at solving problems, these kinds of problems. It doesn't really matter the type of problem, but this is kind of like how I think about how I execute and that sort of a thing. And that's how I've landed all of these different opportunities. And so it is something that I've learned to tweak and to perfect, right? When I talk about like whatever that next thing is, I do, whether I've got the industry experience or the number of years of experience or, the product expertise or whatever, the way that I try to articulate it is, my mind, the way that it works, I know how to identify a problem. I know how to fix problems. I know how to bring teams together, right? Like I try to frame it in that way. So regardless, and I'll use it in this current example that I'm in, I don't know jack about the gift card industry. I get a gift card. I know how to spend money on a gift card, but I didn't necessarily know like how all of that played into our business and into growing that business. But I think my ability to be able to quickly identify what's broken and how to go about leading a team to fix those things, I think played into the person that said, you're right for this job, because they know that's how I think and that's how I execute. And so I've been able to kind of tailor kind of those kind of messaging so that regardless of whether I have all of the things that, somebody says in a job description you're supposed to have, even if I only have half of those things, I think because I know how to tailor the conversation in a way, it doesn't really matter that I don't know 50% of what's on the job description. I know how to figure it out, right?
Right.
I know how to tap into the organization to figure it out. I know how to figure it out on my own. I know how to lean into the team to be able to figure those things out. And I think that's what guys are really good at, right? And so I learned from a man on how to tailor that conversation. And I think that has helped me, land roles where I wasn't the subject matter expert, where I didn't have 100% of those things, because I've been able to tap into, I know how to solve big business problems. This is how I think about it. This would be my approach. And that usually sits well and resonates well, with the folks who are making those decisions.
Absolutely. And I love the fact that you've sought out other people to kind of help you craft your messaging so that it lands and it works for you, right?
Yeah.
And everybody's going to have that different language.
Right.
One of the things that, you've not chosen necessarily industries that are filled with lots of women role models. So you've likely worked with a lot of men. What was it like for you being, one of the only women sometimes, I'm sure, in many of the roles and teams that you were leading?
You get used to it after a while. I mean, it goes far back, college, right? Like even in college, attending Purdue University's undergrad and eventually Georgia Tech, I was always one of a few women, and most of the time, probably one of the only Black people, in the room, let alone, just, being, one of a few handful of women. So I think after a while, you kind of get, for lack of a better phrase, you kind of get used to it. I will say in today's world, we're seeing a lot more diversity. We're seeing a lot more women, a lot more people of color. So I'm proud to see kind of that evolution. But I do think it forces you out of your comfort zone. I think it forces you to figure out, how to work well with people who maybe think differently than you, who maybe have completely different backgrounds than you, right? It really forces you, to figure out how to just work well with others. And so it hasn't always been easy, but I don't know that I also allowed it to handicap me either, right? It was just kind of the situation where, okay, well, it is what it is. I'm equally as capable. And I think that's some of that mindset is just also the way that I was raised, right? My father, was huge in my life, and so when my parents split up, he was huge in my life. He raised my sister and I, and so that mentality of you can do, whatever a man can do, probably better, right? That's always been instilled in me. And so I think when I walk into these rooms and I'm the only, whatever the only is, right? Whether it's the only Black woman, the only Black person, and the only woman in the room, I don't know. I mean, I don't feel uncomfortable. And I think some of that is just, what was instilled in me.
That's amazing. Your father gave you a great gift that way, right? Just to have that kind of confidence.
Well, if you ask my husband, it could be a gift and a curse, right?
Touche. Okay. But still so lovely to have that kind of confidence and be able to notice it perhaps, but not let it get in your way or become an obstacle for you.
That's right.
To show up the way you need to show up and show.
Yeah. And again, it's not always easy because, you still have those insecurities and you still have those doubts, but I think it's just a matter of like, how do you work through them? And if the insecurities and the doubts are big enough, then what are you doing about it? How are you learning to make them less and less of a factor?
Right. Got it. I want to switch gears just a little bit because as a leader in a Fortune 500 company, in large organizations, you've seen lots of different types of initiatives or strategies to advance women. In your experience, what are some of the ones that have made the most impact on you or on the women around you? I
think, and you're absolutely right, I've seen a lot over the years. Most of the time it feels like they're just, it's a nice thing to do. And they're just talking points. And so you don't necessarily feel nor see the, what's the word I'm thinking? the words, but you don't necessarily see the action that you would want to see. I'll say with Fiserv, it's been a very different experience than maybe what I've had with other organizations. Not only do I feel it, I see it. And what I mean by that is my president, as an example, that this is a part of her KPIs. She puts together this quarterly dashboard, and she's looking at, how many, diverse candidates are on a slate. How much diversity are we seeing at director level and above? What's our attrition rate looking like, for women in particular once they get to a certain level, and what are we doing about it, right? And so this is something that she not only measures herself, but she measures like her other leaders. And I gotta be honest, it's the first time I'd ever seen anything like that. Again, I've always heard it, and yes, these are things that we should do, and and here are different programs. But now to take kind of the programming along with some measurable KPIs, and to see kind of action-oriented steps that go along with it, that makes it real to me versus just this nice thing kind of check the box to have.
Yeah, absolutely. What gets measured gets done. That's the old saying, right? And then really following up on that, not only with her performance, but with the performance of the team to follow through. I would imagine if those metrics aren't looking good, there's some explaining to do.
Absolutely. And as you would for any KPI, right? Any KPI that's falling below, where we said that we want it to be, right? We should be explaining like what's happened, why are we off track, and what are we doing to get back on track? So absolutely, it's the same, even for how are we developing women, how are we progressing women, and how are we making sure that our organization, gets kind of that diversity of thought that we're looking for.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've talked about you at the different stages of your life, and I know that this question is going to come in the Q&A in some way, shape, or form, but just thinking about the young people that you meet today, the young women perhaps that you meet today, what's some of the key advice that you share with them about, in 2023 and going forward, what should they be doing to make sure that they have an opportunity to advance their careers?
Yeah, and some of that I said, already. I think the first thing is you got to know kind of yourself, and don't be afraid. Don't limit yourself, right? And I have a person on my team, and I'm coaching her through this right now. She's interested in another opportunity, and again, she's looking at the job description, and she's like, I've got 4 things. I don't have all 5. Maybe I should wait. And I'm like, why are you waiting? You're ready, right? You're ready. You can figure out that other thing, but why are you waiting, right? And so I think you have to, and I love the word you used earlier when you talked about me being fearless. I don't even know that you have to necessarily be fearless, but again, even if you have that fear, don't let that fear stop you, right? Let that fear kind of be your motivator. Let that fear propel you. Because again, if you're a guy, I'm telling you, if they've got 1 out of 5, they're going for it, right? But women, we'll wait till we get all 5. And sometimes we'll even say, I need 6 or 7, before I'm ready to make that move. And so, for her, I'm like, you've got it, you're good, you're golden, you've got it, go for it, right? So I would say first thing foremost, don't let your fear hold you back, absolutely propel you. I think the other thing too, and I think I said this earlier, and it's something that, I've learned, I'm still learning, and I'm still kind of perfecting. Part of growing in an organization, it's not about you getting the work done. It's not always about, and I know it sounds counterintuitive, right? I mean, you absolutely should do a good job. And women, we will go out of our absolute way to ensure that, we're doing the best possible job, and assuming that the work will speak for itself. Unfortunately, it doesn't always work that way, right? And so that's where the networking and the relationships and understanding who the decision makers are, that's where that becomes critically important, because they need to know that you're doing a good job. They need to know that, where you are today, you're excelling. And then they want to know how can they help you get to that next level, whatever that thing is. And so have in your mind, what you're looking for in terms of like expanded opportunities and that sort of thing, and nurture those relationships and continue to nurture those relationships, because like I said, I think as women, And again, I catch myself sometimes doing this. We're so focused on getting the work done. We're so focused on doing a good job. It gets overlooked because other people, they're out there having lunch, they're having conversations, they're playing golf, they're having coffee. And a lot of times that's where those decisions about who's going to get tapped on the shoulder for whatever that next opportunity, whether it's internal, external, that's where those things are. So I'd say, the fear, do it anyway. I would say, building and nurturing those relationships and kind of tooting your own horn to some extent is another piece of advice. And then I think the third thing, just remember, just because you've got a degree, and even if you don't have a degree, you're never going to stop learning and growing. So have that love of learning, have that love of just making yourself better. And whatever that looks like for you, it looks different for everybody. But just remember, keep learning and keep growing, because again, I think, those three things are the things that really kind of helped me in my career. And that's the advice I typically give others as well.
That's great. That's great. And what is sort of a thread across all of those is, managing your career and managing how you want to advance your career is something you need to take seriously. I love when you unabashedly said, my career is important to me. And so if it's important to you, you're investing time in those three things and way, way more, right?
Yeah. And it's okay to tell people that it's important to you, right? Because I think sometimes, we don't want to be seen as overly ambitious, and we don't want to be seen as but it's okay, right? It's okay if you do it the right way. And so, if your career is important, you do have to be intentional, because otherwise things are happening to you and you're not necessarily, kind of in control of that. And so, when you become more intentional about your career, it kind of puts you in the driver's seat of how you want, your career to look.
Yeah, we had a great conversation with a woman, Cheryl Fullerton, just a couple of weeks ago, and that word intentional was so important to her. And here's your Q&A reminder that we're going to switch over to the Q&A shortly. But that I just wanted to go back to that word intentional, because I think that anybody can, but certainly women with the multitude of roles that we play can just kind of go with the flow and the ebb and the path of potentially of least resistance, but that may not be the path that's most fulfilling for you, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Because I think if I had, for a while I did that, right? Because I thought my work would just speak for itself, and it did. And so I was getting tapped to do kind of the same sorts of things, but then I got into, and that's where I used that word earlier when you were asking me about kind of my career journey. I said I kind of got bored, right? I was being tapped to do bigger and bigger projects. And, and initially, that was all fine and well, but I didn't necessarily find myself challenged. And so it wasn't until I started to become intentional about how I wanted to grow and where I felt, I had, gaps kind of in my skills and experiences, and what I needed to do to kind of close some of those gaps so that I could move, in the direction that I wanted to. It wasn't until I became intentional. Otherwise, I would still be getting tapped for the same kinds of roles, because people assume that, oh, she's good at it, this is what she wants to do, but I really wanted to do more.
Yeah. And it serves them, right? It serves them really well to have someone with your experience and capability to do that again. But it might not serve you as well. So I think that those are really important things. Yeah. There's a nice, actually, related question here at the top of our Q&As. It sounds like your first major career plateau led you to your EMBA. If faced with that opportunity again today, would you still make that choice? Or do you believe you can find those M&A and strategic planning opportunities today without the MBA process? Do you believe the MBA is still a prereq to reach that next level?
Yeah, no, I think it's a great question. I think there's a couple of different ways that I can answer it. Do I think it's a prerequisite? Not necessarily. Do I think that there are probably different books or classes or things like that I could have taken, certificates that I could have gained instead of, spending all the money that I spent on that degree? I probably could have taken a different route and gotten kind of the same results. But, I purposely chose the EMBA because I think for me, I wanted that broader exposure to thinking about things more from a business perspective. And what I mean by a business perspective, I wanted to make sure that I understood the financials in and out. I wanted to understand how to make kind of like these data-driven decisions. because that's what I was starting to see, like in the course of, the jobs that I had. Those are all the things that I saw other people when I was thinking about, like, ooh, that sounds like an interesting job. Those are the kinds of things that I think that I was seeing that other people were doing. So I intentionally went down that path because that was a gap in my skill set. Could I have probably done it differently? Yes. I think it probably would have taken me a bit longer to close some of the gaps, real or perceived, that I felt like that I had in my background. So that was a personal choice for me. I wouldn't necessarily like recommend it, for everybody. I think it just depends on kind of what your skills and experiences are, what your background is, and then where you believe you want to go and where you have gaps. I think there are different ways to kind of, figure out, kind of that path forward. So for me, I think I would choose the same, but I think it just depends on the individual. But I think I probably still could have achieved it differently,
Right.
but it still would have involved probably me going back and getting some sort of kind of formal education. Again, whether it's a certificate or class or something like that, or reading books, there still would have been other things. What I will tell you though, what the EMBA did not give me, and and I tell this to the folks over at Georgia Tech all the time, what it did not give me was the sense or the realization of the importance of networking and building those relationships. That is so critically important. And I don't care what degree you get, I feel like that is just a gap in the overall kind of education system, because people knowing who you are, what you're capable of, and you nurturing those relationships over time, I'm telling you, like, that's how you get, these other opportunities, whether internal or external. Like, I feel like that's where the gap is in our education system in general. So the EMBA didn't give me that. That's just something that I think over time, and talking with others and having mentors, really focused on that. But that's an area I think we all need to get better at. And women in particular, I feel like, again, we focus so much on getting the work done and doing a really good job and hoping people see our worth. I think that those are the things unintentionally that are holding us back.
It's really interesting. They show that there are real gender differences in terms of how men and women network, right? Men almost, as soon as they're meeting somebody, they're talking about their jobs, what they do, their professions. Women can talk for days, weeks, months, years, and not even know sometimes about what their other woman's profession is or where they work.
Yeah.
There are many other things to talk about, right? So it's just interesting in terms of how we approach things from a gender perspective, and knowing that might just help us to be more intentional about how we approach it too. I find that part fascinating. There's some related questions here around growth. What are some books you would recommend for personal growth as well as professional?
Yeah, a book that I read when I took over this role, it's by Wanda Wallace, and it's called You Can't Know It All. And I'll tell you, it was the perfect book for me, because this was the first time in my career where I was stepping into a role and I did not have the subject matter expertise. And that is very humbling, right? And that is a very different way to lead versus when you know everything, you've got the experience, you know what to do, you know how to solve the problems, right? And even if your team doesn't, you can kind of swoop in and help figure it out. But to step in to a business that's wrought with problems, from supply chain constraints into, increasing costs, and we're losing customers, and I don't know jack about the business, and that expertise lives within the team, that is a very different way to lead. And so that book was absolutely instrumental in helping me kind of navigate, this new world when I say new world, in this new role that I'm in. And it helped me also to lean into my team differently, because a lot of times, when you lead these teams, they still want to be held accountable, and they still want to be recognized for good work. And, and so I had to lead and lean into them very, very differently than I probably would have done had I been the subject matter expert. So that's one really good book. I think another good book that really changed my life, and you and I talked about this before the call about, now I'm this early morning person. It's called the 5 a.m. Club, right? I actually get up every day now, and I've been doing it now for about 18 months. I get up every day at 4:30 in the morning. I don't necessarily recommend it. You figure out like what works for you, but that works for me. that's my time to work out. That's my time to learn something different. That's my time to pray and meditate, right? And so being able to create kind of that habit has really helped me transform getting my day going, so that by the time I'm in the office, like I'm ready to go. I've learned something, I've gotten my exercise in. So, I'm starting kind of in this place of calm, this place of peace. And I've meditated, I've prayed, right? Like I do that consistently every day. And I've been doing it for about 18 months now. So I would say like those two books are really good books that, I've read in the last 12 to 18 months that have really been transformational to me. And there are a whole lot more because I read a lot. And part of the reason I read a lot, well, I say I read, but I listen to Audible books. But part of the reason is because my commute's, fairly long. If you live in Atlanta, the traffic situation. And so it's a good opportunity for me to listen to a lot of books. And so I do tend to read a lot.
That's great. I hear a lot of people are enjoying those Audible books. And, you mentioned your commute. So one of the questions coming in is always about, how are you managing working in this hybrid? Are you hybrid? Are you in the office? What are you liking about, options or flexibility, or do you take advantage of that?
Absolutely, I take advantage. Absolutely. I'm fortunate, we are a hybrid workforce where, I do need to be in the office, 3 days a week. The good news is I get to choose the 3 days. It is a fairly long commute, but, I try to make the commute as productive as possible, as I said earlier, by listening, to books and podcasts and that sort of a thing. And so that it does help with my commute. But, I need the flexibility because, I am a relatively new mom. My daughter's 3.5, she needs, speech therapy and, and things like that. And, a lot of those therapies that she needs are during the week. And so being able to have that flexibility to still have a productive day, but then by the end of the day to get her to speech therapy so that, she can improve how she communicates, it's been a game changer for me. I think if I didn't have that flexibility, I probably would have to choose a different company that allowed for that flexibility. But I use that flexibility to help with, family time. Because, I do spend a lot of time in traffic. And so on the days that, I'm not spending, so much time, in Atlanta traffic trying to navigate to and from work, that's time for me to either be more productive in my career or more time for me to have time with my family. So I absolutely enjoy that flexibility. I highly recommend it. And again, I think if I didn't have that kind of flexibility, I probably would have to look for some place that, that offered it, because, being a relatively new mom with a child that needs, various therapies, it's important for me to make sure that I'm there and I'm present, in helping her get the therapy that she needs.
Yeah, that's so important. And I remember having many conversations with women about, my company doesn't do this, or my company they're not flexible about that, or I don't feel like it's really an environment that's inclusive for women. And I think when you talk about, if I didn't have that flexibility, I couldn't be there, right? Mm-hmm. And that's important for women to understand. If they're not in an environment where they can be at their very best, and that means holistically as a mom and as a professional, as a woman, as a person, then you need to exercise your options and find a place that does fit well with you. And that's part of advancing your career as well, I believe.
It absolutely is. I think the key though is making sure that when you make that decision, it's not an emotional one. Because I can tell you, I've made some emotional decisions and they have not worked in my favor, right? I knew, I can think of a time where, just the situation wasn't a good situation and I made an emotional decision, didn't think everything through. And I remember when I started that company, the very first day I knew I immediately made a mistake, right? And so it's not a good place to be in. And so, there's a framework that was shared with me, some years ago, and it's called kind of the pain and the gain model, where you list that, and you've probably heard of it, but you literally list out, what's the pain of staying, and what am I gaining if I stay? What's the pain of leaving? And what am I gaining if I leave? And then if you can truly like lay it out, in this, objective way, and it will help you kind of determine, is it time to go? Or are there things that in my current environment, if they changed or if I changed them, that, would make it worthwhile for me to stay. So I highly recommend that framework. because it allows you to kind of take some of the sometimes emotional aspects of the decision off the table. That way it allows you to make, an objective and, really thoughtful decision about your career.
I love that. It's a great model. And I love the fact that it would just highlight what is it that you could have conversations in your current place
Absolutely.
before making a quick or a rash decision. Love it.
Absolutely.
Here's an interesting question for you from Selena. It's about, how do you handle when your president is always commenting to you on grammar issues in emails when you believe it's a culture issue?
I don't know that I've ever had that in particular. So I guess I'd ask the question, like, are you comfortable asking for more clarity? Because if they're commenting, it is something that's maybe bothering them. And so maybe you can ask the question or have the conversation to say, well, what would you like to see different, right? Because sometimes it is, style, sometimes it is culture, or sometimes it could be that there is, in fact, there's an issue, right? But I think you should be able, if you're comfortable. If you're not comfortable, there's something else going on there. But if you're comfortable, have the conversation and say, hey, I hear you loud and clear. I've got the feedback. You've said it a couple of times. Can we dig into that a little bit? Because I want to make sure that I understand, what you are looking for, what you need from me, what gaps you perceive, and that sort of thing. And I think that takes maybe some of the emotional aspects out of the conversation and makes it more of a productive conversation. But I think it starts with having the conversation to get clarity on like what they mean. And if it is a cultural thing, maybe have that conversation to explain that. But I think it starts with at least asking the question. I can't say that I've ever had that come up for me, but I could see that coming up for others. And so hopefully I would hope that you're able to at least feel comfortable to be able to have that conversation. If you're not able to have that conversation, if you don't feel comfortable, then you have to ask yourself, well, why is that? And I think when you dig into that a little bit more, I think that's where that pain and gain model might come into play to say, is this the kind of place that I belong if I'm not able to have kind of these conversations? Because you want to do well, you want to meet people's needs and people's expectations. And so in order to do that, you have to be able to have these productive conversations.
Yeah, I think that's great advice on just about anything, right? If you're not sure or you're not understanding, like if you care enough about it, you have to find a way to have the conversation. And if that still doesn't feel safe, to question why.
Yeah.
Really great. In terms of setbacks, so what's your biggest career setback and what did you learn from it? That's a great question.
Oh, my biggest career setback, because I've had some. I will say this. I stepped into a role for a new company, and I was told about like all the problems, with the team and with some of the departments, and I went in just kind of gangbusters, like I'm gonna fix everything, right? And I rubbed people the wrong way, right? And I think, I took what my hiring manager at the time said, I took it literally, and I just really wanted to get in and make a name for myself. And I don't think that I paid enough attention, whether it was during the interviews or even when I first started, to the culture, to the building of the relationships and those sorts of things. Like I just immediately wanted to get in and fix things. And I think because I was rubbing people the wrong way, I wouldn't necessarily say it was a setback, so to speak, but I think it made my life at the company a little harder, or maybe even a lot harder than it needed to be. And it was my own fault, right? And so what I've learned from that is a couple of things. First and foremost, problems are going to exist, in any role that you take on, in any company, that you start, so those problems are going to exist. I think it's fine to be, kind of gung ho and trying to come in and fix everything. But I do think you have to kind of take some time to understand kind of the lay of the land, understand the culture, understand who the people are, who are the decision makers, who are they leaning on, who has their ear. I think you have to make sure you understand all of those things before you just kind of go in, guns blazing like I did, gung ho, I'm going to fix and solve world hunger. Because again, I rubbed a lot of people the wrong way unintentionally. And it took me a while to figure that out. I now approach, new roles, new organizations, much differently now as a result, because I want to make sure that I understand the people. And that's the thing. Again, somebody was asking the question about, the education piece. And again, I think the gap that's missing in our educational system is we don't do enough talking about people and their behaviors and their motivations, right? And their communication styles and those sorts of things. And so I think you have to understand and figure all of that out first. And it takes time before you kind of go in and, just trying to kind of like solve the world. So I wouldn't call it a setback, but it definitely made, I think, my life a lot harder than it need to be, because I was unintentionally burning some bridges.
Yeah, that's a great reflection. Terrific. Someone's asked if we're going to send the recording out. Yes, we are. The recording will be posted. What do you recommend for people who aren't invited to networking events or opportunities for you to create those relationships? How do you find out about them and just get included?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. I think, aside from getting invited, I mean, that's important. I think, there's a lot of, depending upon like what your industry you're in, what your career is, there are a lot of different trade organizations that are out there that I would encourage you to be a part of. You had said at the top of the meeting, I'm part of the Technology Association of Georgia. It is the largest kind of trade organization in the state, 40,000 members strong, right? And there are all these different kind of committees, whether it's the FinTech Society or, data and analytics, or AI is a big thing right now, or procurement or international business, right? So there are lots of opportunities, when you're a part of an organization like that, or any kind of professional trade organization, where you can get out, you can meet people, you can learn about like what they're doing. You can get development or get access to development and that sort of a thing. So I would encourage you, beyond kind of your day-to-day job, to make sure that you're participating in these external kind of trade professional organizations, because that's where you begin to kind of hone your networking skills. That's where you begin to start to meet leaders of people in your own organization, people even outside of your organization, where you can learn about problems that they're solving that may be similar to problems that you're having in your own organization, right? And so it makes it easier, I think, when you're a part of an organization like that you're interested in, and people who are there are also like-minded, it makes it easier, I think, to be able to have conversations and to be able to build those relationships. So if you're not necessarily getting invited, to networking events, I would encourage you, to become involved in like, various kind of professional organizations, trade organizations, that sort of a thing, because they usually offer a lot of opportunities to kind of, connect and engage, with others.
Terrific. Thanks for that. I am not going to get to all these questions that are coming in.
The hour has gone by fast.
I know you have unleashed a lot of them. But here, I'm going to try and get to a couple here. How did you overcome any challenges with men not wanting to listen or acknowledge your strategies in your project leadership or other leadership roles?
How do I? You're assuming that I have overcome that. I think it's still a challenge, right? I think it doesn't matter your level. I think it's still a challenge. I think you have to so some of it is communication style. And I've spent a lot, when I talk about my development, I've spent a lot of time trying to understand not only my own communication style, but also more importantly, the communication styles of others. And so I think if you can figure out, and a lot of times organizations will do things like Myers-Briggs or DISC or HBI, like those are really, really great tools to kind of understand like people's communication styles, and to some extent even like what their motivations are. Right. I think if you can understand, and I think this is for men, women, senior leaders, the like. I think if you can understand what somebody's motivations are, if you can understand like how they like to communicate, I think you can overcome almost anything, right? And that's not an easy thing to do, but I think, at least in my experience, once I've been able to figure out, okay, well, this person's motivated by being recognized. I might name drop a little bit more, in a meeting, like, hey, I'm working with this other person, and thank you for, helping me, and right. And so now they're starting to get, some of that recognition, in the team. And then now they're like, okay, she's not so bad after all. Let me pull her into some of those conversations. So I think if you can understand better, like what people's motivations are and even kind of their communication preferences, you can kind of use like some of those tactics to kind of build some goodwill where now they're wanting to invite you in. It doesn't always work because some people are just, just not very nice people. Since we're on a live stream, I won't use certain kinds of language, but, but I would say, I think for most people, once you can understand what their motivations are and you can understand what their communication preferences are, then you can kind of tailor kind of how you come to the table. You can kind of tailor that, so that it works for both of you. But again, some people, they're just, they are who they are. And you may just have, unfortunately, you may just have friction with them. And I think you just have to try to figure out how to like work through that. But I would start with trying to understand like what their motivations are and their communication preferences. Those tools really do help.
And that goes whether they're men or they're women, right? Like it's just a matter of understand them as people and where you're going to work with them.
Yeah.
Really quick question here. I'm trying to find a quick one that we can answer. A lot of questions about networking, and I think you've addressed some of these. Oh my goodness, some of these are more complicated. Okay, sorry. How do you handle people who you think are the smartest people, or who think they are the smartest people in the room? Got any great tactics for that?
Yeah, let them be the smartest person in the room, right? I mean, feed their ego, right? I mean, again, I think it comes down to, what are their motivations? And you're not, it's not a battle, I think, worth fighting to like try to bring them down, a peg or two, right? I mean, you can do that, but is that really gonna help you? Is that really gonna be successful? But if you know that being, that person, feeling like, in a room of their peers, feeling like, they are the smartest, then let them, right? Again, I think that's where the name dropping and the, hey, you helped me, like it starts to build that goodwill with them, right? And then now they see you as an advocate, they see you as a partner you can pull in. I mean, you just have to know what people's motivations are, and you work through that, right? Once you understand what their motivations are, again, you can tailor kind of your style. And I tell that to my team all the time, where they'll say, we got to play hardball and we got to do this, and I'm like, no, flies honey, you get more flies with honey. And so understand what this person's motivations are. Their motivations are to grow revenue, with Fiserv. So leverage that, right? If this person's motivation is to be the smartest person in the room, but you need them for something, so leverage that to your ability, right? Give a little and you'll be able to gain more. It takes time because, I mean, we all have egos, and it's hard because you want to kind of bring that person down, a peg or two, and they're probably not the smartest person. But again, is that the thing that's going to be most helpful in that situation? And so, I'm constantly asking myself, besides having a knee-jerk reaction to something, is this going to be helpful or is this going to be harmful? And if I can't truly like answer the question that it's going to be helpful, then what do I need to do differently? And so again, I would challenge you, use that, use again, if there's somebody that you have to work with, somebody that you need to be able to get something done, use that, because now you know what motivates them. Use that to your advantage. Use that as your lever to help get kind of, whatever goal that you're trying to accomplish.
Very savvy, very savvy. This hour has absolutely flown by, Catina. Thank you so very much for all of your experience, sharing your insights. Really authentic, lots of applause coming in. Absolutely. This is our final conversation in the 2023 Women in Leadership Conversation Series. You brought it to a great end, Catina. I want to thank everyone who has listened in on this conversation and the other ones as well. We'll definitely be looking to bring this back in 2024. Look at the love and celebrations here.
Oh, that's so sweet. I love it. Like, you guys are giving me chills. Oh, I love it. I love it. I love it.
We will be posting the recording on YouTube. For those of you who are interested in watching it, you should be able to find that in the next couple of days. Appreciate you joining us, learning with us, and let's connect next year in 2024. Thanks again, Catina. Thanks to everybody.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. Take care.
Bye, all.